I never thought my perfectly ordinary life would take a nosedive into criminal conspiracy territory, all because of a woman with a clipboard and too much free time. The first package that went missing contained nothing special, just a pair of running shoes I'd ordered online. The second was a birthday gift for my nephew. By the third missing delivery, I knew something wasn't right in Oakridge Estates. My name is Henry Anderson, and until 6 months ago, I was just a regular guy trying to live a peaceful life in my modest 2-bedroom home in Brookhaven, Georgia. I'd moved here from Boston for a job in software development at a growing tech company. The neighborhood seemed perfect: neat lawns, friendly neighbors, and a sense of community I hadn't experienced before. What I failed to research properly was the Oakridge Estates Homeowners Association, a seemingly innocuous organization that would become the bane of my existence. More specifically, I failed to anticipate the hurricane in human form that was Patricia Wellington, the HOA president. The first time I met Patricia was during my second week in the neighborhood. I had just finished mowing my lawn when a shadow fell across my driveway. Looking up, I saw a woman in her late 50s with immaculately styled blonde hair that seemed to defy gravity. Her lips were pursed in what I would later recognize as her permanent expression of displeasure. "Your grass is 3/4 of an inch too high according to HOA regulations," she announced, bypassing any form of greeting. "I'm Patricia Wellington, president of Oakridge Estates Homeowners Association." I wiped sweat from my forehead and extended my hand. "Henry Anderson, I just moved in 2 weeks ago." She ignored my outstretched hand, instead making a show of writing something on her clipboard. "New resident status doesn't exempt you from compliance, Mr. Anderson. You'll find the complete rulebook in your welcome packet. I expect full adherence moving forward." With that, she pivoted on her heel and marched away, leaving me bewildered in my driveway. My neighbor, Oliver Martinez, chuckled from across the street where he was watering his perfectly regulation-compliant flowers. "Welcome to Patricia's kingdom," he called over. "Don't take it personally. She treats everyone like they're perpetually on the verge of destroying property values." I laughed it off at the time. What harm could one uptight woman with a clipboard really do? The answer, as it turned out, was quite a lot. The package situation began innocuously enough. In early January, I ordered those running shoes I mentioned. According to the tracking information, they were delivered on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at work. When I arrived home, there was no package on my porch. I figured it might have been misdelivered or perhaps stolen, not common in our neighborhood, but not unheard of either. I contacted the company, and they sent a replacement without much fuss. But when that replacement also disappeared after being marked as delivered, I started to wonder what was happening. By March, I'd had 6 packages go missing. Each time, the tracking information showed successful delivery, but there was never anything waiting for me when I got home. I installed a doorbell camera, but strangely, it never captured any deliveries or thefts. "Maybe check with your neighbors," suggested my colleague Mia when I mentioned it during lunch. "Someone might be accepting them for you and forgetting to let you know." That sounded reasonable. That evening, I knocked on doors up and down my street, asking if anyone had received packages on my behalf. Mrs. Garcia next door hadn't seen anything. The Johnson family across the street hadn't either. No one had my packages, and no one had seen anything suspicious. Until I reached Oliver's house. "Packages going missing. That's odd," he said, leaning against his door frame. "You know who you should talk to, Patricia. As HOA president, she claims it's her duty to maintain awareness of neighborhood activities." He made air quotes with his fingers. "She's been known to intervene. When she thinks something isn't right, intervene with mail delivery." I asked incredulously. Oliver shrugged. "Let's just say she takes her position very seriously. Remember last summer when she confiscated the Thompsons' inflatable pool because it was visible from the street? Or when she removed all of Ryan Miller's potted plants because they weren't aesthetically aligned with community standards? That's insane," I said, "and possibly illegal." "Welcome to Oakridge Estates," Oliver replied with a wry smile, "where your property rights end where Patricia's opinions begin." The next day, I decided to confront Patricia directly. I waited until evening when I knew she'd be home based on the schedule Oliver had kindly provided. Her house was exactly what you'd expect the most pristine property on the block, with not a blade of grass out of place and window boxes containing geometrically perfect arrangements of seasonal flowers. I rang the doorbell, which chimed an elaborate melody inside. Patricia opened the door wearing an apron over a pastel cardigan and slacks. Her face immediately hardened when she recognized me. "Mr. Anderson, I hope you're not here to contest the citation for your unauthorized garden gnome." I blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. Garden gnome. "I don't have a never mind. I'm here about my missing packages. 6 of them over the past 3 months, all marked as delivered but never arriving at my door." Something flickered across her face so quickly I almost missed it. Was it guilt, concern, annoyance? "I fail to see how this is an HOA matter," she replied coolly. "I've been told you. Monitor neighborhood activities pretty closely. I thought you might have noticed something." Patricia's posture stiffened. "Are you accusing me of something, Mr. Anderson?" "Because I don't appreciate implications about my character." "I'm not accusing anyone," I said, raising my hands in a placating gesture. "I'm just trying to find my missing deliveries." "Perhaps if you were home during regular delivery hours instead of who knows where, your packages wouldn't go missing," she sniffed. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an HOA budget meeting to prepare for." The door closed in my face before I could respond. As I turned to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that Patricia knew more than she was letting on. But without proof, what could I do? April arrived with spring flowers and 3 more missing packages. I was becoming increasingly frustrated and had started having everything delivered to my office instead. But that wasn't a permanent solution. It was inconvenient and raised eyebrows when large personal packages arrived during business hours. The situation escalated when my mother sent me an antique pocket watch that had belonged to my grandfather. It was irreplaceable, and despite my explicit instructions to send it to my work address, she shipped it to my home out of habit. According to tracking, it was delivered on a Tuesday afternoon. It never arrived. That was the final straw. "You need to report this," Oliver insisted when I told him about the watch. We were standing in his garage where he was showing me his woodworking projects. "This isn't just annoying anymore, it's theft of something meaningful." "To who?" I asked. "The local police won't care about missing Amazon packages." "Not the local police," Oliver said, setting down his sanding block. "The United States Postal Inspection Service." I raised an eyebrow. "The what now?" "Postal inspectors. They're federal agents who investigate mail theft and other postal crimes. They take this stuff seriously, like federal charges seriously." I pulled out my phone and did a quick search. Oliver was right, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service was a legitimate federal law enforcement agency with jurisdiction over crimes involving the mail system. "Worth a shot," I muttered, bookmarking their website. That evening, I filed a report with the Postal Inspection Service, detailing all my missing packages, including dates, tracking numbers, and contents. I mentioned my suspicions about Patricia, but emphasized that I had no proof, just a gut feeling based on her controlling behavior and the strange coincidence that my doorbell camera never captured any deliveries. I didn't expect much to come of it. Maybe a form letter acknowledging my complaint or, at best, some general advice about secure delivery options. So I was surprised when, 3 days later, I received a phone call from someone identifying himself as Postal Inspector James Reynolds. "We've received your report about systematic mail theft in your neighborhood, Mr. Anderson," he said. His voice was authoritative but not unfriendly. "I'd like to ask you a few more questions if you have time." For the next 30 minutes, I explained everything in detail: the missing packages, Patricia's general demeanor, the neighborhood dynamics. Inspector Reynolds listened carefully, asking occasional clarifying questions. "This is an unusual pattern," he said finally. "Most package thieves are opportunistic. They grab what they can see and move on. The fact that your camera never captures the deliveries suggests something else might be happening." "Like what?" I asked. "Let me look into this," he replied, not directly answering. "In the meantime, continue having important items delivered to your work. We'll be in touch." 2 weeks passed with no word from Inspector Reynolds. I assumed my case had been filed away with thousands of other minor complaints. Then, on a Saturday morning in early May, everything changed. I was in my front yard, planting flowers that I'd carefully selected to comply with HOA regulations, when an unmarked sedan pulled up across the street. 2 people emerged, a man and a woman in business casual attire that somehow still screamed, "Federal agent." They approached Patricia's house and knocked on her door. From my vantage point, I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could see Patricia's face transform from her usual look of stern disapproval to something approaching panic. After a brief exchange, the agents entered her home. My phone buzzed with a text from Oliver. "Are those cops at Patricia's?" I texted back. "I think they are postal inspectors." 20 minutes later, the agents emerged with Patricia between them. She wasn't handcuffed, but her posture was rigid with tension. They guided her to their car and drove away. The neighborhood exploded with speculation. By evening, various versions of what had happened were circulating. Some said Patricia had been running a credit card scam. Others claimed she was harboring a fugitive. No one knew the truth except perhaps me. The confirmation came the following Monday when Inspector Reynolds called again. "Mr. Anderson, I wanted to update you personally. We executed a search warrant at Patricia Wellington's residence on Saturday and discovered a significant amount of evidence related to your complaint." I sat down, suddenly lightheaded. "Evidence? You mean my packages?" "Some of them, yes, at least the contents. Mrs. Wellington appears to have been systematically intercepting deliveries to your address for the past 6 months. She had a rather elaborate operation. But how and why?" I asked, still struggling to comprehend the situation. Inspector Reynolds sighed. "As for how, she was monitoring delivery trucks and retrieving packages from your porch immediately after delivery, usually within minutes. That's why your camera never caught anything. As for why..." He paused. "That's where things get interesting. We found a detailed log in which she documented every item she took from you, along with justifications for why you didn't deserve to have them." My mind reeled. She was keeping track. Yes. According to her notes, it began when you installed a bird feeder that she claimed violated HOA regulations because it might attract wildlife. When you didn't remove it after her warning, she decided to teach you a lesson. I vaguely remembered the bird feeder incident from January. Patricia had left a note on my door about it, but when I checked the HOA regulations, there was nothing prohibiting bird feeders. I'd ignored her note, assuming it was just another of her baseless complaints. So she stole my mail because of a bird feeder? I was dumbfounded. That was the initial trigger, but it seems to have evolved into something more personal. Mrs. Wellington has been charged with multiple federal offenses, including mail theft and obstruction of correspondence. These are serious charges, Mr. Anderson. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence. My packages had been stolen by the HOA president as some twisted form of punishment for a non-existent violation. It was so absurd that I almost laughed until I remembered my grandfather's pocket watch. "Did you find an antique pocket watch?" I had asked Inspector Reynolds before ending our call. "Yes, it was recovered along with several other items. You'll be contacted about retrieving your belongings once they're processed as evidence." The next few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings and neighborhood drama. Patricia was released on bail but required to stay away from me and my property. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove her as president. The details of her scheme became public knowledge, turning her into a neighborhood pariah overnight. I received most of my stolen items back after they were processed as evidence, including my grandfather's pocket watch, which thankfully was undamaged. Some things were missing or had been disposed of, but the Postal Inspection Service helped me file claims for reimbursement. What shocked me most was discovering how extensive Patricia's surveillance of me had been. According to evidence gathered by the inspectors, she had been monitoring not just my deliveries but also my comings and goings, keeping detailed notes about when I left for work, when I returned, and even who visited my home. It was a level of obsession that went far beyond overzealous HOA enforcement. In June, 3 months after I'd filed my initial report, I attended Patricia's arraignment. She appeared diminished somehow, her once imposing presence reduced to a nervous woman in her late 50s facing serious federal charges. When she spotted me in the courtroom, her eyes narrowed briefly before her attorney whispered something that made her turn away. The judge read out the charges: 18 counts of mail theft, obstruction of correspondence, and possession of stolen mail, all federal offenses that carried potential prison time. Patricia entered a plea of not guilty, but her attorney immediately indicated they were open to discussing a plea agreement. Outside the courthouse, Inspector Reynolds approached me. "This case is stronger than most we see," he said. "The detailed records she kept of her activities will make it difficult for her to claim innocence." "I still can't believe she did all this over a bird feeder," I said, shaking my head. Reynolds gave me a knowing look. "In my experience, Mr. Anderson, this kind of behavior rarely starts with one incident. Mrs. Wellington's history suggests a pattern of controlling behavior that simply found a new target in you." He was right. As the case progressed, other neighbors came forward with stories about Patricia's tyrannical rule over Oakridge Estates. There was the young couple whose request to install a wheelchair ramp for their aging parent had been repeatedly denied on aesthetic grounds. The single mother who had been fined for hanging Halloween decorations 2 days before the permitted holiday decoration period. The retiree who had received daily citations when recovering from surgery prevented him from maintaining his lawn to Patricia's standards. What had seemed like isolated incidents of petty rule enforcement revealed themselves as part of a larger pattern of control and intimidation. Patricia had been using her position to wage personal vendettas against residents who challenged her authority, however slightly. In July, Patricia accepted a plea deal. In exchange for pleading guilty to 5 counts of mail theft, the prosecution agreed to recommend a reduced sentence. She would still face consequences: probation, community service, and restitution, but would likely avoid prison time due to her age and lack of prior criminal record. The day after her plea hearing, I found an envelope in my mailbox hand-delivered, not sent through the Postal Service. Inside was a handwritten letter from Patricia. "Mr. Anderson, my attorney advises against contacting you, but I feel compelled to explain myself. What began as an attempt to enforce community standards became something I no longer recognize or understand. I convinced myself that my actions were justified, that I was protecting our neighborhood from those who didn't respect its rules. I now see that I was wrong. The bird feeder was merely a convenient excuse. In truth, I resented your ease in joining our community, the way neighbors welcomed you while I, despite years of service to Oakridge Estates, remained merely respected but never liked. This does not excuse my behavior but perhaps explains it. I am sorry for the distress I caused you, especially regarding the family heirloom. My actions were inexcusable. Patricia Wellington, I read the letter twice, unsure how to feel. Was this genuine remorse or a calculated attempt to generate sympathy before her sentencing? Either way, it offered a glimpse into a deeply unhappy woman who had channeled her discontent into controlling others. The HOA elected a new president in August, Olivia Palmer. a retired high school principal with a reputation for fairness and common sense. Her first act was to initiate a comprehensive review of all HOA regulations, with input from residents about which rules were necessary and which were arbitrary or excessive. "We're aiming for a community where rules serve the residents, not the other way around," Olivia explained at her first meeting. "Safety and property values are important, but so is creating a neighborhood where people actually want to live." It was a refreshing change. Under Olivia's leadership, the atmosphere in Oakridge Estates noticeably lightened. Neighbors who had previously avoided each other for fear of being reported for violations began to socialize more freely. Community events were organized. The HOA newsletter, once filled with rule reminders and violation notices, now featured neighborhood news and helpful resources. Patricia's sentencing took place in September, 6 months after my initial report to the Postal Inspection Service. She received 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay restitution to all affected parties. Additionally, she was prohibited from serving on any HOA board or similar position of authority for 10 years. As I left the courthouse after the sentencing, Inspector Reynolds caught up with me in the parking lot. "Satisfied with the outcome?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. "I think justice was served," I replied finally. "She's facing consequences, but they're proportionate to what she did. I never wanted to see her behind bars, I just wanted my packages back and for her to stop." Reynolds nodded. "That's a healthy perspective. Some victims in your position would want maximum punishment." "What would that accomplish?" I asked. "She's lost her position, her reputation, and now has a federal conviction on her record. That seems like enough." "Speaking of your packages," Reynolds said, reaching into his jacket. "This was processed as evidence but cleared for return earlier this week. I thought you might want it back promptly." He handed me a small box. Inside was a leather watch case containing my grandfather's pocket watch. I ran my thumb over its worn surface, feeling a connection to my family history that Patricia had temporarily severed. "Thank you," I said, my voice thicker than I expected. "This means more than you know." "Just doing our job, Mr. Anderson. Mail theft might seem minor to some, but we understand that what travels through the postal system isn't just stuff, it's connections between people." Back in Oakridge Estates, life settled into a new normal. Patricia sold her house and moved away, unable to face the daily reminder of her disgrace. The new neighbors who purchased her property were a young family with 2 small children, exactly the type of residents Patricia would have scrutinized mercilessly for potential violations. Oliver and I became close friends, often gathering on weekends for barbecues that would have certainly earned citations under the old regime. He took great pleasure in helping me install a second bird feeder in my backyard, this one larger and more elaborate than the first. "To the bird feeder that launched a federal investigation," he toasted, raising his beer bottle. "And to postal inspectors who take their job seriously," I added, clinking my bottle against his. As fall arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and changing leaves, I reflected on how differently things might have turned out. If I hadn't reported the thefts, how long would Patricia have continued her campaign against me? What else might she have escalated to when stealing my mail no longer provided sufficient satisfaction? The morning after Patricia's sentencing, I woke to find a small gathering of neighbors on my front lawn. Led by Olivia, they presented me with a community gift, a custom-made mailbox with enhanced security features. "We wanted to acknowledge what you went through," Olivia explained, "and to thank you for bringing to light a situation that was affecting more people than you realized. Patricia's treatment of you was extreme, but her controlling behavior impacted all of us to some degree." The gesture moved me deeply. What had begun as an isolating experience of being targeted had transformed into a catalyst for positive change throughout Oakridge Estates. In October, the The HOA hosted its first ever Neighbor Appreciation Day, a community-wide event in the local park with food, games, and music. Residents who had previously only interacted through formal complaints or neighborhood disputes found themselves engaging as friends and allies. I volunteered to help with setup, arriving early on the morning of the event. As I assembled tables and hung decorations, Olivia approached me with a smile. "Henry, there's someone here who'd like to speak with you," she said, gesturing toward the parking area. Inspector Reynolds stood beside his car, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater rather than his usual business attire. He waved when he saw me looking. "Inspector," I greeted him, walking over. "This is a surprise." "James, please," he corrected. "I'm off duty today." "Olivia invited me to your community event, said it might be nice to see the positive changes that came from our investigation." She was right, I agreed, though I'm not sure everyone will see the connection. "That's okay," he said, surveying the park where neighbors were arriving with food dishes and children in tow. "Sometimes the best outcomes of our work aren't directly visible. A community finding its way back to actual community that's worth celebrating, even if most people don't know the catalyst." Throughout the day, I found myself sharing the story with those who asked, editing out the more disturbing details for general consumption. Most neighbors were aware of Patricia's removal and the general reason, but few knew the extent of her actions or the federal nature of her crimes. "She stole your mail for 6 months because of a bird feeder," one newcomer to the neighborhood asked incredulously. "That's insane." "The bird feeder was just an excuse," I explained, remembering Patricia's letter. "It was really about control and resentment. The HOA position gave her authority, and she couldn't handle having that authority questioned." By the end of the day, as neighbors helped clean up the park and made plans for future gatherings, I realized how dramatically my perspective on Oakridge Estates had changed. What had once seemed like a pleasant but somewhat sterile neighborhood now felt like a genuine community, one that had confronted its problems and emerged stronger. That evening, as I was sorting through my mail, which now arrived without incident, I found a postcard from my mother asking if I'd received the pocket watch and how I liked it. I smiled at the irony, her question arriving months after the fact, traveling through the same postal system that had become so central to my Oakridge Estates experience. I called her immediately, explaining in broad strokes what had happened. She was appropriately outraged on my behalf, but also impressed by the outcome. "So your HOA president became a federally convicted mail thief, all because you put up a bird feeder she didn't like," she summarized. "Henry, only you could move to a quiet suburb and somehow end up involved in a federal investigation." I laughed. "Trust me, it wasn't my plan, but in a weird way I'm almost grateful it happened. The neighborhood is a much better place now." "Well, I'm glad you got Dad's watch back at least," she said. "And I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself instead of just accepting the situation." After we hung up, I went out to my front porch and sat watching the evening activity in Oakridge Estates. Across the street, the new family that had purchased Patricia's house was out for a walk, their young children racing ahead on the sidewalk. Next door, Mrs. Garcia was watering plants that would never have met Patricia's stringent approval. Down the block, a teenager was practicing skateboard tricks in his driveway without fear of citation. The irony wasn't lost on me. Patricia's obsessive dedication to maintaining standards had actually been preventing the neighborhood from becoming the kind of place where people truly wanted to live. Her removal had allowed Oakridge Estates to develop an authentic community character rather than an artificially imposed one. In November, almost exactly 1 year after I'd moved to Brookhaven, Olivia invited me to join the HOA board as a member at large. "We need people who understand the difference between necessary oversight and petty control," she explained. "Your experience gives you a valuable perspective." I accepted the position, seeing it as an opportunity to help ensure that what happened with Patricia wouldn't be repeated. At my first meeting, I proposed a residents' Bill of Rights that clearly defined the limits of HOA authority and established better procedures for resolving disputes. The rules should protect residents, not punish them, I argued. We need checks and balances to prevent any single person from wielding too much power. The proposal passed unanimously. December brought holiday decorations to Oakridge Estates far more elaborate than had ever been permitted under Patricia's reign. Houses sparkled with lights in various colors, lawn ornaments appeared in whimsical arrangements, and no one received a citation for putting their decorations up too early or taking them down too late. I received a holiday card from Inspector Reynolds, now James, as we'd maintained a friendly relationship after the case concluded. Inside was a newspaper clipping about a similar case in South Carolina, where an HOA president had been removing residents' mail as punishment for perceived infractions. His note read, "Your case has helped us identify a pattern we hadn't recognized before. Thank you for coming forward. Happy holidays, James." I pinned the card to my refrigerator, a reminder that speaking up can have ripple effects far beyond one's immediate situation. As the year drew to a close, I hosted a small New Year's Eve gathering for neighbors who had become friends. Oliver was there, along with Mrs. Garcia, the Johnson family, and several other Oakridge Estates residents who, like me, had found a real sense of belonging in the post-Patricia era. At midnight, as we counted down the final seconds of the year, I couldn't help but reflect on how differently things might have turned out. If I had simply accepted the missing packages as bad luck, if I hadn't reported the thefts, if Inspector Reynolds hadn't taken my case seriously, Patricia might still be patrolling the neighborhood with her clipboard, using her position to satisfy her need for control. Instead, Oakridge Estates had transformed into the community it was always meant to be, one where rules existed to benefit residents, not to subjugate them. One where neighbors looked out for each other rather than reporting each other. One where a bird feeder could hang without triggering a federal investigation. As we toasted the new year, Oliver raised his glass in my direction. "To Henry," he said, "who taught us all that sometimes fighting for a package means fighting for something much bigger." Everyone clinked glasses, and I felt a surge of gratitude for this unexpected outcome. What had begun as a frustrating mystery of missing deliveries had catalyzed positive change throughout our community. Patricia's federal charges hadn't just resolved my personal situation, they had freed an entire neighborhood from a regime of petty tyranny disguised as rule enforcement. Later that night, as my guests departed and I began clearing away glasses and plates, I paused by my front window. The street was quiet, houses dark except for the glow of holiday lights. My bird feeder swung gently in the breeze, visited even at this late hour by a nocturnal visitor, an owl perched momentarily before continuing its hunt. I thought about Patricia, wherever she was now, serving her probation and perhaps reflecting on how her need for control had ultimately cost her everything. I hoped she had learned something from the experience, not just about the legal consequences of mail theft, but about the true purpose of community leadership. As for me, I had learned that sometimes justice arrives in unexpected packages. And that even federal charges can be a gift when they deliver a neighborhood back to the people who call it home.